Do-hyuk stood panting, his hands slick with blood. The moonlight cast an eerie glow on his crimson-stained fingers, highlighting the horror of what had just transpired. The stench of iron filled his nostrils, a metallic tang that seemed to cling to the very air around him. The ground was littered with bodies, a grim testament to the fight. Each fallen warrior told a story of struggle and sacrifice, a silent witness to the chaos that had unfolded. He stared at the small glass vial in his hand, the source of the carnage. It was a simple object, yet it held the power to change everything. It was a power he never wanted, a responsibility he never asked for. The weight of it pressed down on him, almost suffocating in its intensity. With a heavy heart, Do-hyuk flung the vial into the darkness. The act felt both liberating and final, a desperate attempt to rid himself of its burden. It shattered against the stone, a finality to his action. The sound echoed in the silence, a stark reminder of what he had done. There was no going back. He was alone. The darkness seemed to close in around him, a silent companion to his solitude. The silence after the battle was deafening. It was as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for what would come next. He could still hear the clash of steel, the screams of the fallen. But it was over. He had survived. The memories, however, would haunt him forever. Do-hyuk stumbled, his legs threatening to give way beneath him. Each step was a battle in itself, a testament to his sheer willpower. His body ached, every muscle screaming in protest. The pain was a constant reminder of his ordeal, a physical manifestation of his inner turmoil. He had pushed himself to the limit and beyond. The boundaries of his endurance had been tested, and he had emerged, albeit barely. But he couldn't afford to rest, not yet. There was still much to be done, and he had to keep moving forward no matter the cost. Do-hyuk reached for the clasp of his armor, his fingers fumbling with the cold, unyielding metal. Each movement felt like a battle, his strength waning with every attempt. It was a struggle to remove, the weight of it almost unbearable. The armor seemed to cling to him as if it had a will of its own, resisting his efforts.
"Let me help you with that." A voice echoed in his mind, gentle yet commanding, offering a strange sense of comfort.
Do-hyuk froze, his heart pounding in his chest. He recognized that voice, a voice he had not heard in years, yet it felt so familiar. It was the voice of the being that resided within the armor, the source of its power. The armor began to glow, a soft light emanating from its ancient runes. "Who are you?" Do-hyuk asked, his voice barely a whisper, filled with a mix of curiosity and fear.
"A friend," the voice replied, its tone ancient and powerful, carrying the weight of countless ages.
With a surge of energy, the armor unclasped itself, falling to the ground with a heavy thud. Dust rose around it, creating a mystical aura. Do-hyuk stared at it, a mixture of fear and fascination in his eyes. He could hardly believe what had just happened. He could feel its power emanating outward, a tangible force that seemed to hum in the air, vibrating with an ancient energy.
The voice spoke again, this time softer, almost a whisper in the darkness. "You have done well, Do-hyuk." The words filled him with a sense of relief and accomplishment, a feeling he had longed for.
"Why me?" Do-hyuk finally asked, the question that had been burning in his mind.
The voice chuckled, a sound that seemed to reverberate through Do-hyuk's very being. "This armor, this power, it is your birthright," the voice explained.
Do-hyuk shook his head, refusing to believe. "I don't want this," he said, his voice filled with anguish. "This power, it brings nothing but pain."
"Power is not inherently good or evil," the voice countered. "It is a tool, Do-hyuk. It can be used to protect, to heal, to build, or it can be used to destroy." The voice paused, letting the words sink in. "The choice, Do-hyuk, is yours."
Section 4. The Weight of War. Do-hyuk stared at the armor, his reflection staring back at him. The metal was cold, yet it seemed to burn with the weight of his responsibilities. He saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the fear, but also a glimmer of something else. A spark that refused to be extinguished. Determination. He had a choice to make. A choice that would define not just his fate, but the fate of many. Ignore this power and let others suffer, or embrace it and fight for a better future. The path was unclear, but the stakes were undeniable. The weight of the decision pressed down on him, heavy and suffocating. It was a burden he had to bear alone. He thought of the people he had lost, the friends he had failed to protect. Their faces haunted his dreams, their voices echoed in his mind. He looked out at the carnage around him, a stark reminder of the reality he now faced. War was coming. The signs were everywhere. He could feel it in his bones. The air was thick with tension, the ground seemed to tremble with anticipation, and he knew deep down that he couldn't hide from it. He had to fight. There was no other option. For himself, for his loved ones, for the future. The weight of war was heavy, but his resolve was stronger. Section 5. Strategy and Survival. Do-hyuk took a deep breath, the air cold in his lungs. He needed a plan. His mind raced, analyzing the situation, strategizing. He couldn't win this war alone. He needed allies, resources, information. He thought of the scouting parties he had sent out, their mission to gather intel on the enemy. Were they still alive? Had they learned anything useful?
Do-hyuk, we're here. We have information.
He reached out with his senses, trying to establish a connection with his men. Time seemed to slow down. He could feel the faintest of links, a flicker of recognition. They were alive, and they were returning. Section 6. The calm before the storm. Do-hyuk allowed himself a small smile, a rare moment of peace. It wasn't much, but it was a start. He had allies. He had valuable information. And he had a plan, a strategy to follow. He would use every ounce of his strength, every bit of his cunning to defeat the enemy. The night was quiet, the only sound the whistling of the wind. But Do-hyuk knew this peace wouldn't last forever. The calm before the storm was upon them. He would use this time to prepare, to train, to become stronger. He would not be caught off guard again, ever. Section 7. Ready to fight. As the sun rose, casting its golden rays across the battlefield, Do-hyuk stood tall. He was no longer the same man who had entered this fight. He had been forged in fire, tempered by loss. He was ready. He donned his armor, the metal feeling cool and comforting against his skin. He could feel the power coursing through him, a surge of energy that filled him with strength. He was ready to face whatever came his way. The war was far from over. But Do-hyuk was no longer afraid. He was unbreakable.